Hi everybody, I'm Susan Mulvihill. Welcome back to our vegetable garden in Spokane, Washington. Our hardiness zone is 5B to 6A. As you can see, not a whole lot is going on in our garden just yet, but that's because it's still too early. Today is very windy and cold, and boy am I ready for spring to get here. What's the topic for today? Well, this is the second video in my series of 3 on how to deal with different types of damaging vegetable garden insect pests using organic methods. This is so important. So last week I talked about dealing with aphids, cabbage worms, and leaf miners. This week I'm going to talk about flea beetles, ugh, those are awful, hornworms, and slugs and snails. I've got a whole lot of information to share with you. And again, because it's too early in the season, I don't have live shots that I can do showing you these insects at work in our garden. But I do have some wonderful photos to share with you and all kinds of tips to help you successfully control them. Now, before we get underway, I have a really important tip to share with you. As the author of the Vegetable Garden Pest Handbook, which is all about both beneficial insects and damaging insects in the vegetable garden and how to deal with the bad guys organically, and also because I've been around a while, I get a lot of questions asking me what kind of bug is this and what do I do about it? And what I often hear from folks is, you know, I never had this bug in my garden before until I brought home some plants from the garden center or the plant sale. And you know, there is absolutely nothing wrong with buying seedlings from those sources. It's totally okay. But you need to do due diligence before you give them your money. So this means taking a close look at the plant you want to buy. Look at the leaves and the stems. Do you see any insects? Do you see any eggs? Look at the leaves on the plant. Does it look like maybe they have some kind of a disease going on? That problem is not going to get any better. So again, examine your plants before you buy them, and that will save you a whole lot of grief. I have to admit right off the bat that I am very lucky because I've never had flea beetles in my garden, but they are certainly present in this region. I know they're very challenging to control, and that's one of the reasons I brought up the issue of checking plants before you buy them. This is what flea beetles look like, and they are tiny at only 1/4 inch long. Flea beetles are similar to aphids in that you never see just one, right? The adult lays eggs in the soil near the base of the plants they're attracted to. The larvae chew on the plant's roots at first, then they pupate in the soil and emerge as adult beetles. Here's what their damage looks like. See all those little holes in the leaves of this eggplant? In the horticultural world, we call those shot holes because it looks like a person shot the leaves with a shotgun. Since a plant's leaves need to be able to conduct photosynthesis, all of this damage is a serious problem and will affect how well the plant can grow. You might also notice the plants are wilting or their growth is stunted. The veggies they are attracted to include artichokes, beet family crops, cabbage family crops, corn, lettuce, and members of the nightshade family such as tomatoes, peppers, potatoes, eggplants, and tomatillos. The good news is that there are 2 types of beneficial insects that prey upon flea beetles: big-eyed bugs, which are actually quite tiny, and parasitic wasps. So that's encouraging, right? Let's talk about the things you can do to thwart them in your garden. First of all, if your season is long enough, consider planting targeted crops later than usual to avoid when the flea beetles are busily laying eggs. You can also cover the planting bed with something that is known as reflective silver plastic mulch. This is available from garden centers and online. After you put it in place, you either cut X's or small circles in it and plant your seedlings through them. The concept is that the mulch is so bright and reflective, it makes it hard for flea beetles to find your plants. That allows the plants to grow and get off to a great start. Once the plant's leaves cover a lot of the mulch, it will be easier for the beetles to find them. But by then, your plants are better able to withstand their damage. Another option is to cover your plants with floating row covers, which I discussed in last week's video, so there's a barrier between the beetles and the plants. Once the plants start blooming, you will need to remove the cover. But again, what you're doing is giving the plants a nice start. Consider planting a trap crop. Let's say you want to grow eggplants. 2 weeks before you plant them, plant a few eggplants in another area of your garden. Let the flea beetles find them, lay eggs, and so on, and then pull up the plants, insects and all, and dispose of them in your trash. You can also try one of these organic products, diatomaceous earth. Now I want to explain what that is. So this is a powdery product that looks like bread flour, but it's made from the ground up fossilized remains of diatoms, which are algae. While we can't feel them, they have tiny sharp edges that will cut into an insect's skin, causing them to dehydrate and die. You can sprinkle it on the plant's leaves and stems and around the base of the plant. Another option is neem oil. Now, I know a lot of gardeners swear by it, but one thing I want to make sure everyone is aware of is that neem will kill pollinators, so don't use it anywhere near flowers. And one last item would be spinosad, or products containing it. And what spinosad is a fermented soil bacteria, and it also is toxic to pollinators, so once again you need to make sure you don't use it anywhere near flowers. There are 2 species of hornworms you might encounter in your garden: tomato hornworms and tobacco hornworms. This photo is of a tobacco hornworm, which has 7 diagonal lines along each side of its body and a red horn on the hind end, while tomato hornworms have 8 V-shaped lines along their bodies and a black horn on the end. They both cause the same type of damage, and control methods are the same, so at least that makes it easier. The adult version of both species of hornworms is a moth. For tomato hornworms, it's the 5-spotted hawk moth. And for tobacco hornworms, it's the Carolina sphinx moth. Each lays eggs on the plants, which hatch into the caterpillars. These worms have voracious appetites for the leaves and fruits of tomato plants, but they can also be found on other nightshade family crops, such as eggplants, peppers, and potatoes. The weird thing about them is that they are so well camouflaged that most times gardeners have no idea they're in the plants until they suddenly see a whole bunch of munched foliage or chewed tomatoes. And that's when gardeners usually spot one of these huge worms. You also can usually find a whole bunch of worm poop on the ground below the damage, so if you look in the plant above that area, you just might see them. While I've never tried this, I've heard that you can easily find hornworms at night by going out to your garden with an ultraviolet flashlight, so you might consider trying that. The great news is that the caterpillars have several natural predators: assassin bugs, lacewings, ladybugs, predatory wasps, and parasitic wasps. And I wanted to reassure you that the parasitic wasps are not aggressive and out to get humans. Now, I know this photo isn't the best quality, but if you ever see a hornworm, and look at the very center of this photo, and it looks like it has grains of white rice on its body, just leave it alone because something really cool is in progress. This means a parasitic wasp has laid eggs on or in it, and the hornworm isn't long for this world. Eventually, the eggs will hatch into more parasitic wasps, which are fantastic beneficial insects, and they'll go off and parasitize other insects. So how can you control these beasties? Be sure to monitor your plants regularly for them, and you should do that with everything in your garden. You can hand pick them off the plant, and I don't know about you, but I would wear gloves because they're kind of disgusting, and squish them or put them in a container and throw them in your trash. If you see that you have the caterpillars, you also can spray the plants with Bacillus thuringiensis, or BT, which contains beneficial bacteria that will kill the caterpillar stage. To be honest, I think slugs and snails are disgusting. Although I should mention that technically they're not insects at all, but rather mollusks. I included them in my book because so many gardeners deal with them. As I'm sure you all know, snails have a shell, which usually grows about 1.5 inches in diameter. Slugs do not have shells, and most common garden slugs are up to 2 inches in length. One sign of their activity is a slime trail, which is a mucus-like substance that they exude in order to move about. The most common signs of snails and slugs in your garden are jagged holes in the plant leaves. Which plants do you usually see slugs and snails on? Artichokes, beans, beet family crops, cabbage family crops, lettuce, peppers, and tomatoes. Before I get into the control methods, I wanted to show you a photo of a leopard slug. Believe it or not, they are considered fairly beneficial. While they do chew on plants, they don't to the extent that regular garden slugs do. But leopard slugs do prey upon garden slugs. How cool is that? Other natural predators include ground beetles, rove beetles, ducks, chickens, and lizards. There are 5 control methods that I wanted to share with you today. The first is hand picking. I know, yuck, but wear gloves and then it won't be so bad. You can sprinkle diatomaceous earth around the plants you're trying to protect. You can make beer traps, so that's an interesting topic. Snails and slugs are attracted to the smell of yeast in beer. And what you can see in the photo here is that I took an empty cat food can or a tuna can, I put it into the soil so that the top lip of the can was even with the soil surface. I poured about 1 inch of beer into it. The slug or snail comes to investigate and they fall in and drown. The next method is to use slug and snail bait, but I want to point out something that's very important. Organic snail and slug bait contains the active ingredient of iron phosphate. It's a natural material and it is not toxic to kids or pets. Non-organic slug and snail bait has the active ingredient of metaldehyde. It is toxic to kids and pets. And I can just see a little kid picking up one of these pellets off the soil surface and putting it into their mouths. Yikes, you don't want that to happen. Also, know that a little goes a long way. I have heard that if you use a lot of slug bait, it can harm earthworms, so keep that in mind. Then there are copper collars that we have made for single-stemmed cabbage family crops like broccoli, cabbage, and kale. Here's how it works. The skin of slugs reacts electrically to copper, so they don't want anything to do with it. We cut 1.5 inch tall rings from a scrap piece of 3 inch diameter plastic drain pipe. Then we stuck copper tape around the outer perimeter of the rings. You can find Corey's slug and snail tape, which is a paper-backed copper tape, and that's what we used. When I am in the process of planting seedlings that have a single stem, I slip the rings around the base of each one. I also watch the plants to make sure no leaves are bending down and touching the soil, because that would be another way for slugs to get up onto the plants and chew on the leaves. This method has worked so well, especially for our broccoli crops. Well, does your brain feel like it's full now? I know that was a lot of information, but I hope it's really going to be helpful for you. And I'm always happy to help you identify an insect problem and give you suggestions. You'll see my email address at the end of this video. Thanks so much for watching today, everybody. Happy gardening.